So on Wednesday, I was out with my wife celebrating our 31st anniversary. Woohoo! It's exciting. Celebration of love. And there's a story in the news about a school shooting in a Broward County public school down in Florida. And a lot of people have had a reaction to that, of why does this sort of thing happen? Why is this part of our lives? And then there's the question of how that fits into this New Thought philosophy and what's going on with all that. And all sorts of stories started just jumbling through my mind because the school, Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, is in Parkland, Florida, and it's on Pine Island Road there in Broward County. And when I first moved to Broward County to work on the radio in 1987, I lived on Cleary Boulevard and Pine Island Road, about 12, 13 miles south of where the school is. My daughter attended the Broward County Public Schools. So there's a connection there, and it's like, this is not something that's remote and disconnected, and not at all. And I spent a bunch of years as a teen advisor, and the teens who I work with as a teen advisor are the same as those kids. In fact, the first teen group that I worked with, we went to a winter overnight winter camp down in Florida, and it was the teens and advisors from the Fort Lauderdale Church, which was the local one to there. So this is not somebody else's story. This is my story, and it's our story. And it's easy to get into the horrific nature of it and get defiant and angry and go through all the stages of grief that are involved when something senseless like this happens. And I started thinking about my own childhood. Even before I was a teen, when I was little, there were 5 families like living within a 2-block radius of where we lived. And in fact, and we all went our separate directions. About 3 or 4 years ago, I got a call from Michelle Palamount. She says, "You need to say hi to somebody." And she puts Lee Kofke on the phone. Now, Lee Kofke was one of those 5 families. And she'd been working with Michelle for a long time before they made the connection that her dad and my dad actually co-owned a sailboat. And we spent, we spent huge amounts of family time together. And those things that seem like they're not connected and don't mean anything then, and come out to mean something different later on. The family lived across the street from them was the Siegels. And Robin Siegel was a year older, my brother's age, and Jenny was my age. And we spent all of our time together. And like I say, we all went off in different directions. And thinking about traveling and being in different directions, I lived in Florida for a while, I lived in South Carolina for a while. I traveled on business, and I flashed onto this recollection of an argument that I had on an airplane on my way back home from a trade show, because the announcement was to turn off your computer. And so I put my computer to sleep, and the guy sitting in the seat next to me was having none of this. He says, "You have to turn it off. You can't just put it to sleep. You have to." So it's fine. I've been doing this for a long time. It's going to be okay. He says, "You have to turn it off. It could interfere with the navigation system." I'm having an argument, like on approach into Philadelphia. That's noteworthy in my mind because the date was September 10th, 2001. The day after that, what people did on airplanes changed. I used to have a pocket knife on my keyring. I cannot carry that on my keyring anymore because I've inadvertently had it confiscated 3 times by the TSA. So I just don't do it anymore. Because things changed. Things changed, and tragedies happened that day. And Robin Siegel, who was married, living in Connecticut, her husband went to work that day at the World Trade Center. And he was one of 3,000 people who lost their lives that day. And you look at that and you say, that's senseless. Why do things like this happen? Why do we have tragedies like this in the world? And there's all the talk about a senseless loss of life, and it didn't mean anything. And something changed in our country on September 11th. I mean, the whole thing with the TSA started since then. it started being impossible for people to hijack airplanes and fly them into buildings. Because up until then, it had been possible, nobody had done it. The rules have changed now. Is that what it takes to get the rules to change? Is that what it takes to get our attention so that we can, as Ernest Holmes said, look a fact in the face and know something better? That's not who we are. As a people, that's not what we're about. I choose something better, and I'm willing to put my energy and my time and my effort and my conscious intention into creating something new. Well, if you think about the tragedies that have happened, sometimes nothing seems like it's changed at all. And then other times, we get to a tipping point, and then it changes. There's a rally yesterday at the federal courthouse in Fort Lauderdale, and the students from that school were speaking with such passion. We need to change the rules. We need to change the way we're engaging with our Second Amendment rights and our children's safety. Maybe that's the thing that's going to make a change. Maybe that's what it takes. And what we know from this teaching is that we're all living in these physical experiences, and sometimes they're cut short, and sometimes they just go the duration that they're going to. Tongue-in-cheek way to put it is that perfect health is the slowest rate at which we can die. Because there's, when somebody's born, there's a foregone conclusion. There's a timeline there. When we do memorial services, we talk about the dash. Because on every tombstone, there's a date of birth and a date of death, and between them there's a dash. And everything that happens in our lives takes place during the dash. So the choice isn't, how do I avoid that end date? Because eventually it's coming. And I don't know when my end date is, and I don't know when your end date is, but let's pick a point suitably far in the future. Let's say 100 years from now.
I like it.
Okay, 100 years from now, I think it would be reasonable to assume that we would probably mostly have reached our expiration date by then. Lane's here. Let's make it 150. Doesn't make any difference. Pick an arbitrary number, and there's a time span there. And it's not about how many days we squeeze into our life. It's about how much life we squeeze into our days. Three years later, Robin died of breast cancer. For her family, for her friends, that was equally tragic. But it wasn't on the grand stage. It wasn't one of those pivotal things where everybody was on board. She wasn't part of a victims fund. She didn't have rallying cries because of what had happened to her. And that doesn't take anything away from it. We're all on our dash. We're all living the life that we're living and doing what it is that we're doing. So there's an invitation here. The invitation here is to not be complacent. The invitation here is to, if you don't know what to do, that's perfectly okay. The invitation is to set your mind to having things get better, and then take that into prayer, to take that into meditation, to take that into the quiet and ask, what's mine to do here? And maybe what's mine to do here is to hold that space, to hold that consciousness, to be that bright light of conscious intention that this situation that we're looking at that is unpleasant and unacceptable can get better and is getting better. And I love to talk about the second act. Things get awful in the second act. The first act, you meet all the characters, everything's happy, everybody's getting to know each other. The second act, the evil forces, the malevolent influence, Darth Vader, comes in, is going to upset everything and decimate everyone, and it's all doom and gloom. And then there's the third act, where something changes, something happens, and that's where the transformative process is. And that needs the second act to happen. It needs to have that challenge to come up, to be transcended, to be met, to be elevated, in order for that third act to play out. And when we're in the middle of a second act, it is sometimes really difficult to remember that there's a third act on the way. There's a story of a woman who's standing out in the garden, and she's parched. She's just so thirsty. It's all she can think about is that she needs to get a drink somehow. And she's got a water glass, but it's empty. And so she's stuck. And that's her second act, because the story is, I am so thirsty, I can't think about anything else other than my thirst, and I need to get this taken care of, and there's no water. There's nothing here. We were telling a story at practitioner class about a guy who's at an opulent banquet. Wonderful dinner, and the decorations are gorgeous, and the place settings are wonderful, and the people are all great, and there's wonderful conversation going on, and he's sitting at his table, and everyone around him has a fabulous meal, wonderful food in front of him, and his plate is empty. And he starts to get those thoughts like, what's the matter with me? Don't I deserve to have some food? He's looking around, and everybody in the dining room has something to eat except him. And that second guessing and that fear of being less than, about being left out, about not being worthy, starts to come up for him. Same thing that's happening for the woman. She's thirsty. It's just like, this is not a big deal. And she realizes, oh, there's a garden hose. I can probably go over to the garden hose and get some water from the garden hose. So she goes over to where the garden hose is. She figures out what's going on. She puts her cup underneath the hose and she turns the faucet on. And nothing happens. And then it gets worse. It's like, oh my God, why? Really? I'm doing everything that I can think of, and what's the matter with me? And there's yelling, and there's screaming, and there's anger. What the heck is going on? Blaming, all the rest of that. What we get to do is zoom out. In the same way that we get to zoom out when we're looking at the horror of that story in Parkland, or 9/11, or any of the other countless tragedies that we see in the news. Yeah, there is something that is completely unacceptable that's going on. And when we look at it from a wider perspective, there perhaps is something, there's an invitation for something bigger, for something better, for something different. A friend of mine sent me a video called Pale Blue Dot. I don't know if you've seen it. When Carl Sagan was working with NASA, and the Voyager spacecraft had gone through the entire solar system and was on its way out into intergalactic space, Carl Sagan had a great idea. He said, let's turn it around and get one last picture of Earth from way out there. And there's a video of it, and it's just chilling, because it's one of those zoom out things, and you wind up, and Earth is this tiny pale blue dot in the midst of this vast space. And the story is that everything that has ever happened in human history, all of the wars that were won, all of the babies that were ever born, all of the successes, all of the inventions, everything happened on that pale blue dot. And so you think, if we change everything we possibly can from the edge of our solar system, which is the little tiny piece of the universe, nothing visible will have changed. It matters to us. Matters a lot to me. But on a universal scale, it's not that big a deal. Which means the universe is perfectly happy to let anything happen. That's the invitation. When there's a situation where there's the fact looking us in the face, we have the opportunity to say, I choose something different. I choose something better. And better is a judgment. Okay? When I choose something better, it's because I'm looking at something and I don't like it. And that's okay, because I'm a spiritual being having a human physical experience. And I can choose the stuff that I like and don't like. Generally not good to call them good or bad, because then you just get into arguments with people who want to be the other way. But I'm always free to choose more love, to choose a greater experience of peace, to choose that harmony of all of the pieces that are part of this one infinite creation, fitting together in a way that's more obvious to me and to us. So it turns out the guy in the restaurant, it's a buffet. And everybody else who knew the drill got up, went to the buffet line, got whatever it was that they wanted, and went back and enjoyed their meal. And the invitation was the same for him. As soon as he had that awareness that he was being invited to indulge in whatever dinner experience he wanted to have, he was free to continue sitting at the table with an empty plate or to do something different. I myself rarely make it to a buffet without going through the line twice. But that's my personal second act. We'll talk about that some other time. And we have that invitation when something, quote, bad happens in the world around us. We can look at that and take it into our consciousness that that's an invitation for something to get better. And the woman, the thirsty woman in the garden with the garden hose where the thing isn't working, she looks down and she realizes that she's standing on the hose. Well, sometimes that infinite flow of good that's available all the time is being blocked by our own consciousness, by our own actions, by our own activities. There are countless times in my life when I've done that. And when I'm working with clients, doing prayer work with people, it comes up again and again and again. The story of somebody who wants to have a loving relationship. They want to have somebody to share their life and their home with. And you go through their house, there is not an inch of closet space for somebody else to put their sweater. It's like, we need to make room. We need to open ourselves up and leave room for whatever it is that we're looking for in our lives to come into our lives. And everything is possible. It all starts in consciousness. It all starts with that invitation. And sometimes we get to notice where we are and how we're engaging with the world, and notice whether we're standing on the hose. And then we get to choose. Do I want to continue standing on the hose because this is where I've always stood, and this is a very comfortable place for me to be standing, and it turns out that I really don't want to do that. There's a picture of a kid looking into the end of a fire hose. That would be a bad time to stop standing on the hose. But we get to choose. And then we can rearrange the way that we're engaging with the world around us to invite in something new, to allow in more love, more good, more joy, more harmony, more balance, because that's the nature of the universe. We start every practical prayer that way. There is one power and presence, one infinite creative essence that shares itself as all of its creation. That divine essence, that God presence is me, right here and right now. And I speak with the same creative authority as when the infinite said, "Let there be light." And we know for certain that the infinite was not standing on the hose. Invitation is the same for you. You deserve all of the best. I love you. So it is. Thank you.